My daughter kicked me out of the lake villa I built just so her in-laws could take over my property. 4 hours after they moved in, they were fleeing into the night without their shoes, absolutely terrified of the house itself. This is a story about what happens when a smart home is weaponized against the people trying to steal it. Before I reveal the hidden trap I set to break their sanity, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And please subscribe if you believe that a father's kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. I slammed the heavy door of my vintage Jaguar and grabbed my leather weekend bag, already picturing the quiet hours ahead by the water. 3 days of peace at my Lake Oconee villa was exactly what I needed after another exhausting week of managing commercial developments in downtown Atlanta. The 90-minute drive from the city had been worth it just to see the sun glinting off the water again. But as I walked up the stone path, the knot in my shoulders returned. A strange SUV was parked crookedly in my driveway, blocking the entrance to the garage. I stepped around it, my heart rate picking up a rhythm I did not like. I rounded the corner to the back terrace, the place where Betty and I used to drink our morning coffee, and froze. 2 figures in my white Egyptian cotton bathrobes stood by the railing, crystal tumblers of my 30-year-old bourbon in their hands. My daughter, Keisha, leaned against the cedar post, her hair wrapped in a silk scarf, looking like the queen of a castle she bad not built. Behind her, a man I recognized as her husband, Dante, shifted uncomfortably when he spotted me. "What the hell is going on?" I muttered, the heavy bag slipping from my suddenly numb fingers. Keisha straightened, but she did not smile. Her face hardened into an expression I had never seen before, not even during her rebellious teenage years. "Dad, you cannot stay here," she called out, her voice sharp enough to pop the balloons of hope rising in my chest. "Dante and I are planning a romantic weekend." I blinked, certain I had misheard. This was my villa. The deed had my name on it, bought with money I had earned, pouring concrete and drawing blueprints while they were still in diapers. Betty and I had picked out every tile, every fixture, every piece of furniture in this house. "But Keisha, this is my home," I started, my voice trailing off as the absurdity of having to state this obvious fact hit me like a physical slap. "I do not care." She set her glass down on the table with a sharp clink that echoed in the silence. "We were here first and we are not leaving." Dante mumbled something I could not catch, looking down at his bare feet, but Keisha waved him off with a dismissive flick of her wrist. Her bathrobe fell open slightly at the knee, and she pulled it tighter with an angry jerk. "Honey, I drove nearly 2 hours," I said, taking a tentative step toward the sliding glass door. "I just wanted to spend the weekend quietly. Get out of here and do not bother us." Keisha's voice rose to a shout that scared a flock of birds from the nearby pines. "You are just in the way anyway. You always kill the vibe." The words hit me like a physical blow to the gut. In the way? This was my property, my retreat, the place where I came to feel close to her mother's memory. I stood there with my bag at my feet, staring at my only child as she glared at me from the terrace of my own home. Dante looked everywhere except at me, his face flushed red above the collar of my robe. He took another sip of my bourbon, the ice clinking softly, a sound that usually meant relaxation but now sounded like theft. 30 years old and Keisha was ordering me off my own property like I was some unwanted stranger soliciting donations. The girl who used to climb into my lap for bedtime stories, who had called me daddy until she turned 16, who had sobbed in my arms at her mother's funeral. Betty's voice whispered in my memory, "Be patient with her, Zay. She is still processing the grief. Give her time." I had given her 3 years of patience, of understanding, of bending over backward to accommodate her moods and financial demands. And this was what it had gotten me. "Fine," I heard myself say, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Fine, I will go." I bent to pick up my bag, my knees creaking with the motion. 62 years old, and my own daughter was treating me like dirt on her designer shoes. "Good," Keisha called out, stepping down from the terrace to ensure I was actually leaving. "Next time, call first. Next time, call first to use my own property." I walked back to my car on unsteady legs. Each step felt like a retreat from some battlefield I had not even known I was supposed to fight on. Keisha followed me halfway to the driveway, her arms crossed, watching me like a security guard escorting a fired employee. "Just go back to the city, Dad," she said, her voice dropping to a patronizing tone. "You are better off in the condo. This place is too much maintenance for you anyway. You are getting too old to manage it." I opened the heavy door of the Jaguar, tossing my bag onto the passenger seat. I did not look back at her. I could not. If I looked at her, I might cry, or I might scream, and I refused to do either. I slid behind the wheel, the smell of vintage leather offering a small comfort. As I fumbled with the keys, the window rolled down just an inch. Keisha had turned back to the terrace where Dante was waiting. Her voice carried clearly in the crisp lake air. "God, he is so depressing lately," she said, her laugh sharp and cruel. Dante said something low, and then Keisha replied loud enough for the wind to carry it right to me. "Do not worry about him. Once we get the locks changed, Vernon and Patrice are going to love it here forever. It is basically theirs already." The key froze in the ignition. Vernon and Patrice, Dante's parents, the people who had insulted Betty at our wedding, they were planning to move them into my sanctuary. The engine turned over with a smooth purr. British engineering, reliable as always. Unlike family, apparently. I backed out of the driveway, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went dark against the leather. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of Keisha and Dante settling back into their chairs, raising my glasses in a toast to my departure. They thought they had won. They thought I was driving home in defeat, tail between my legs, just like Betty always worried I would. But as the tires hit the pavement of the main road, the sadness in my chest began to calcify into something colder, something harder. "The bank is closed," I whispered to the empty car. Monday evening found me in my study in Buckhead, nursing lukewarm coffee and the remnants of a solitary dinner. 3 days had crawled by since Friday's humiliation at the lake. Saturday, I jumped every time the phone rang, expecting Keisha to call with some explanation or perhaps an apology. Sunday brought the uncomfortable realization that maybe I was always too quick to surrender to hope. Now on Monday, the silence in the large house felt different. It was not peaceful. It was heavy with the weight of unasked questions. I unlocked my laptop and opened the spreadsheet I had been avoiding for months. I called it the ledger of grief. Since Betty passed, I had used my bank account as a bandage, trying to cover the gaping wound in our family with cash. I scrolled through the entries, the blue light of the screen illuminating the lines of worry on my face. Keisha's wedding 2 years ago. She had called it needing help with expenses, but I had written a check for $85,000 without even asking for a budget breakdown. The casual way she had accepted it, like I was an ATM dispensing expected cash rather than her father making a significant sacrifice, should have been my first warning. Then came Dante's credit card consolidation 8 months later. "Dad, we really need a fresh start," Keisha had said, her voice carrying that particular tone I had learned meant another request was coming. $42,000 to wipe clean debt that Dante had racked up on sneakers and electronics. I had paid it. I scrolled down further. The boutique business Keisha wanted to start in Midtown, $120,000 for a lease and inventory for a store that never actually opened. The total at the bottom of the column made my stomach turn. Over $400,000 in 3 years. I sat back in my leather chair, the leather creaking in the quiet room. I had not been parenting her. I had been enabling a lifestyle she could not afford, trying to buy the love she no longer seemed capable of giving freely. The phone's shrill ring cut through my thoughts like a fire alarm. Keisha. Her name flashed on the display. I took a deep breath and answered, "Dad." Her voice carried none of the warmth I had desperately hoped for. It was cold and businesslike. "Listen carefully. Dante and I have decided. The villa now belongs to his parents." My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. "What?" I asked, my voice raspy. "Keisha, what are you talking about?" "Vernon and Patrice," she said, as if explaining something to a slow child. "They were evicted from their apartment in Decatur this morning. It is a long story involving a misunderstood lease agreement, but they need proper housing immediately. We told them they could have the villa. It is their home now. You are forbidden from going there anymore without our permission." The leather chair groaned as I leaned forward, my free hand gripping the mahogany desk. "Keisha, have you lost your mind?" I asked, the shock finally giving way to anger. "You cannot just take my property." "Actually, I can and I am." Her voice sharpened to a blade's edge. "You hardly use it anyway, and they are family. They desperately need a place to stay, and you have plenty of room. You are just being selfish." 30 years of 12-hour days building my architectural firm flashed through my mind. Every permit fight, every difficult client, Every sacrifice Betty and I had made to afford that dream home by the water. It is my villa. The words exploded out of me with surprising force. I worked 3 decades to buy that place. Keisha's laugh held no humor. You are being ridiculously petty. After everything we have done for you since Mom died. Something snapped inside my chest. Everything you have done for me. My voice rose to match hers. I paid for your wedding, your car, your college loans, that fancy apartment deposit, Dante's debts. That is what fathers do. She cut me off. Besides, you are old and alone now. What do you possibly need with such a big villa? Old and alone. The phrase hit like a physical blow, but instead of crumpling, I felt something harden inside my chest. Betty's gentle voice whispered from memory about patience, but Betty had never heard her daughter speak with such calculated cruelty. Those are Dante's parents, Keisha, complete strangers to me who insulted your mother at our wedding. They are family now, she insisted, and unlike you, they will actually appreciate what they are getting. My grip tightened on the phone until my knuckles went white. No. Silence stretched between us. I could practically hear her surprise crackling through the connection. What did you just say? She asked. I said no, Keisha. The answer is no. You cannot say no to me. That villa is wasted on you anyway. Her composure finally cracked, revealing the ugly entitlement underneath. Vernon and Patrice are moving in this weekend. Send over the gate codes and the security access by tomorrow morning. They can find their own housing solutions, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. I cannot believe how selfish you have become. Keisha's voice climbed toward hysteria. Mom would be ashamed of you. That crossed every line. Betty would never have supported this theft. This manipulation of a grieving husband's love for his only child. Your mother would be horrified by what you have become, I said quietly. Keisha's intake of breath was audible. How dare you, she screamed. I hung up. For the first time in 3 years, I had hung up on my daughter. The phone sat silent in my lap as my heart hammered against my ribs. Outside, the Atlanta evening traffic hummed its familiar rhythm. But inside my study, everything had changed. The phone rang again immediately. Keisha. I turned it off. Sleep remained elusive that night. I sat in my leather chair until well past midnight, replaying every word of Keisha's outrageous demand. The silence in my study felt different now, not peaceful, but charged with a new and dangerous energy. By morning, something fundamental had shifted inside me. Tuesday brought clarity with the sunrise. I made coffee, retrieved my laptop, and began researching property law with the methodical precision that had built my architectural firm. Georgia statutes, transfer requirements, documentation needs, information I had learned decades ago but never imagined needing against my own daughter. The phone buzzed with text messages throughout the day. Keisha again. Dad, we need to talk about the gate code. Then, do not be stubborn about this. Finally, Vernon and Patrice are packing their things. I deleted each message without responding. Wednesday morning, I drove to my attorney's office in Buckhead. Marcus Vance had handled my business transactions for 15 years, a sharp mind wrapped in diplomatic courtesy and tailored Italian suits. His corner office overlooked the tree canopy of the neighborhood, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the skyline of Atlanta in the distance. Zay. Marcus rose from behind his mahogany desk, extending a firm handshake. Good to see you, my friend. How can I help? I settled into the familiar client chair, the leather still creaking in exactly the same spot as always. I need to discuss property protection strategies immediately. Marcus raised an eyebrow but remained professionally neutral. Commercial or residential? Residential. The Lake Oconee Villa. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Someone is attempting to claim ownership rights they do not possess. Family member. The question hit like a diagnosis I was not ready to hear. Yes. Marcus nodded slowly, his expression growing more serious. That complicates things, Zay. Family disputes over property can get messy quickly. Judges do not like getting involved in domestic squabbles if they can avoid it. What are my options? Several. Marcus pulled out a legal pad, his fountain pen already moving across the yellow paper. First, we ensure your ownership documentation is ironclad. Second, we can establish additional protective measures. Trusts, LLC structures, whatever makes sense for your situation. How quickly can we move? I asked. Depends on the complexity. Basic documentation review takes a few days. More sophisticated protection could take 2 to 3 weeks. I thought about Keisha's text message. Vernon and Patrice are packing their things. I may not have that long. Marcus set down his pen, studying my face with the intensity that made him excellent at reading clients and juries alike. "Zay, is someone trying to force you off your own property?" The question hung between us like an accusation. When I nodded, Marcus's professional demeanor hardened into something more personal. "Then we start immediately. But Zay, if you really want to stop this, if you want to make sure they can never touch that house again, we need the nuclear option." I leaned forward. "Tell me, we transfer the asset entirely. We do not just put it in a trust where you are the beneficiary. We transfer the deed to a charitable foundation. You retain lifetime rights to use the property, but you technically own nothing. If you own nothing, they can take nothing." The idea settled in my mind, cold and heavy. It was extreme. It was final. And it was perfect. "Do it," I said. "Create the Betty Washington Foundation for At-Risk Youth. Transfer the villa to the foundation." Marcus looked at me, his eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation. "Zay, this is irrevocable. Once I file this, you cannot get the house back. You cannot leave it to Keisha in your will. It belongs to the charity forever." I thought about Keisha standing on my terrace, holding my bourbon, telling me I was in the way. I thought about Vernon and Patrice planning to move into the home Betty and I had built. "Do it," I repeated. "How long?" Marcus checked his watch. "Drafting the bylaws, creating the entity, filing the deed transfer. I need 48 hours minimum. Friday afternoon at the earliest." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A new text from Keisha. "Movers are booked for Sunday morning. Don't embarrass us by locking the gate. Vernon and Patrice deserve a nice welcome. Sunday." That gave me 4 days, but the paperwork would not be ready until Friday. I needed to stall them. I needed to make sure the house was secure until the law could catch up with their greed. I looked up at Marcus. "Get the paperwork started. I will handle the security." Marcus nodded, already reaching for his phone to call his paralegal. "You be careful, Zay. Family wars leave the deepest scars." I stood up, buttoning my jacket. "The scars are already there, Marcus. Now I'm just stopping the bleeding." I walked out of the office and into the bright Atlanta sunshine. The humidity hit me instantly, but I felt cold inside. I had just initiated the process to give away my most valuable asset to keep it from my own child. It was a tragedy, but it was also a strategy, and strategy was something I understood. I checked my phone again. Keisha's text was still there, demanding a welcome for her in-laws. I would give them a welcome all right, just not the one they were expecting. I walked to my car, dialing the one number I knew could help me hold the line until Friday. It was time to visit Tyrone. I pulled my Jaguar curbside in East Atlanta Village, the pristine wax job of the car standing out against the eclectic mix of street art and renovated bungalows. Tyrone lived in a modest house that looked normal on the outside but consumed more electricity than a small factory on the inside. He answered the door in a faded anime t-shirt and sweatpants, his eyes widening behind thick black frames when he saw me standing on his porch. "Zay," he said, wiping grease from his hands onto his pants, "I did not think you were coming by until next month." "Come in, man. Come in." I stepped into the cool hum of his living room. There was no furniture, just racks of servers, tangled nests of fiber optic cables, and 3 massive monitors glowing with lines of code. Tyrone was the son of my first foreman. When he showed more interest in motherboards than mortar, I had paid for his computer engineering degree at Georgia Tech. It was one of the few investments I had made that yielded genuine gratitude rather than entitlement. "I need a favor, Tyrone," I said, skipping the small talk. "A big one." Tyrone sensed the gravity in my voice immediately. He cleared a stack of hard drives off a folding chair and offered it to me. "Sit down, Zay. You look like you just went 12 rounds with a concrete mixer. What is going on?" I sat, the metal chair cold through my suit trousers. "It is Keisha," I said. "She is trying to seize the Lake Oconee property. She wants to move her in-laws in this weekend against my wishes." Tyrone shook his head, a look of disgust crossing his young face. "After everything you did for her. That is messed up, Zay. So what do you need? You want me to change the digital locks remotely? I can do that in 30 seconds. "No," I said, leaning forward, my elbows resting on my knees. Locks will not stop them. They will just call a locksmith or break a window. They think they own the place. I need something stronger. I need the house to reject them. Tyrone stopped typing, spinning his chair around to face me fully. Reject them? What do you mean? I mean psychological warfare, I said, the words tasting cold and sharp. I want to turn the villa into a fortress that defends itself. I want them to be so uncomfortable, so terrified, that they leave of their own free will and never want to come back. A slow grin spread across Tyrone's face. He pushed his glasses up his nose, his mind already racing through the possibilities. You want a smart home haunting? Exactly, I said, but it has to be non-damaging. I do not want to hurt them physically. I just want to break their resolve. Can we do it? Tyrone turned back to his screens, his fingers flying across a mechanical keyboard that clacked like gunfire. We can do way more than that. Your villa is already wired with a Crestron automation system, right? I nodded. Okay, so we have control over lighting, HVAC, audio, water, and security sensors. Tyrone pulled up a schematic on his center monitor. Here is what we do. We overwrite the comfort protocols with a defensive algorithm. He began listing ideas, his excitement growing with each one. We can program the lights to strobe at irregular intervals, disorients the equilibrium. We can hack the audio zones to play infrasound, low-frequency audio that causes anxiety and dread in humans, even if they cannot consciously hear it. Then we layer in some directional audio, whispers, footsteps, sudden bangs. I watched him work, amazed as always by his brilliance. What about the water? I asked. Can we control the plumbing? Tyrone laughed. If it has a solenoid valve, I can control it. We can make the showers blast cold water randomly, turn on every faucet in the house at 3 a.m., flush the toilets in sequence. We can make the house feel like it is having a nervous breakdown. I need visual effects too, I added. Something that makes them question their sanity. Tyrone pointed to a pile of equipment in the corner. I have 3 high-lumen mapping projectors from a gig I did for a museum last week. We can hide them in the vents or behind furniture, project shadows on the walls, moving figures, ghosts. Is it legal? I asked, the businessman in me needing to check the liability. Tyrone shrugged. It is your house, Zay. You are just installing a very aggressive security system. We will put up a warning sign. If they ignore it, they are consenting to the experience. It is basically a high-tech scarecrow. Perfect, I said, standing up. We have until Sunday. Can you come up to the lake with me tomorrow? Tyrone was already unplugging a server tower, his face lit with the joy of a master craftsman given a blank check. Zay, for the man who paid for my tuition, I would haunt the White House. Let's go make some ghosts. We spent the next hour loading his van with equipment. Motion sensors, heavy-duty speakers, miles of cabling, and the projectors. As I watched Tyrone gently place a delicate circuit board into a padded case, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. Keisha thought she was fighting a senile old man who would roll over and sign a deed. She had no idea she was about to go to war with a systems architect and a cybersecurity genius. I pulled out my phone and checked the camera feeds from the villa one last time. It looked peaceful, the water calm, the rooms empty and waiting. Enjoy the silence while you can, I thought. By Sunday, that house is going to have a voice, and it is going to scream. I climbed back into my Jaguar, Tyrone following in his van. The convoy of justice was heading north. Thursday morning broke with a deceptive calm over Lake Oconee. The water was a sheet of glass reflecting the Georgia pines, unaware that it was about to become the backdrop for a psychological war. Tyrone and I unloaded his van in silence, moving with the focused efficiency of bank robbers rather than homeowners. We carried black flight cases and spools of cable through the front door, the very threshold Keisha had barred me from just days ago. It felt strange to be invading my own sanctuary, treating the home Betty and I had built as a tactical position to be fortified. We started in the master suite, the room Keisha and Dante had claimed for themselves. Tyrone stood on a ladder, carefully removing the vent cover of the central air conditioning system. I handed him a compact, high-output speaker that looked more like a military device than audio equipment. This one is the heavy hitter Zay, Tyrone said, his voice echoing in the empty room. It is a directional infrasound emitter. It vibrates the chest cavity and causes immediate feelings of panic and nausea without making a sound you can actually hear. It is what they use for crowd control. I watched him wire it into the house's power grid, hiding the cables behind the drywall. He replaced the vent cover, leaving no trace of the weapon hidden inside. We moved to the guest wing next, the rooms intended for Vernon and Patrice. Here, Tyrone opted for visual terror. He mounted small, high-definition laser projectors behind the crown molding, angling them to cast images onto the opposite walls and the ceiling. "These are mapped to the room's geometry," he explained, wiping a smudge from the lens. "When the system triggers, it will look like shadows are pulling themselves out of the corners. Not clear enough to identify, just vague enough to let their imagination fill in the nightmares." The plumbing was next. We went down to the mechanical room in the basement, the heart of the villa's infrastructure. Tyrone connected his laptop to the main solenoid control board. His fingers flew across the keyboard, rewriting the logic that controlled water flow to every faucet and showerhead. "I am setting a randomizer algorithm," he said, looking up with a grin that was both boyish and terrifying. "Once the security protocol engages, the hot water heater will isolate itself. Then the pressure valves will pulse. Full blast cold water, then nothing, then full blast again. It will sound like the pipes are hammering inside the walls." We spent the afternoon testing the sensors. I walked from room to room while Tyrone monitored the feeds from the kitchen island. "Living room clear," he called out. Hallway triggered. The integration was seamless. The house looked exactly as it always had. The expensive art hung straight on the walls. The Persian rugs lay flat on the hardwood. But beneath the surface, the villa was humming with kinetic potential. It was a loaded gun waiting for someone to pull the trigger. As the sun began to dip below the tree line, casting long shadows across the property, we moved to the final phase. The warning. I had printed a sign on professional aluminum stock, looking exactly like a standard security notice, but with very specific wording Marcus had advised. Private property, smart security active, biometric entry only. Unauthorized presence will trigger defensive protocols. Enter at your own risk. I screwed it into the cedar siding right next to the front door. At eye level, it was impossible to miss. If they entered, they were ignoring a clear, written warning. Legally, they were accepting the consequences. Tyrone packed the last of his tools, closing the back of his van. "The system is live, Zay," he said, handing me a tablet that now controlled the entire house. "It is set to purge mode. The moment the front door opens without your biometric unlock code, a 60-second timer starts. If they do not enter the code, the house wakes up, and it will not go back to sleep until they leave the geofenced perimeter." I looked at the tablet, seeing the green status icons for every room. Audio armed, projection armed, hydro armed, strobe lighting armed. It was a masterpiece of engineering, and a tragedy of family. I should have been planning a barbecue. I should have been teaching grandchildren how to fish off the dock. Instead, I was arming my home against the people who should have felt safest there. We walked to our cars, the gravel crunching loudly under our feet. I took one last look at the villa. The windows were dark, reflecting the orange and purple of the sunset. It looked peaceful. It looked inviting. It was the perfect trap. I felt a heavy sadness settle in my chest, knowing that the next time I saw this place, the silence would be broken by screams. But then I remembered Keisha's voice telling me I was in the way. I remembered Vernon and Patrice planning to move in. The sadness hardened back into resolve. "Let's go, Tyrone," I said, opening the door of my Jaguar. "The show starts Sunday." We drove away, leaving the villa silent and waiting, a predator disguised as a shelter, ready to teach a lesson that words had failed to convey. Sunday afternoon arrived with the heavy, humid heat typical of a Georgia spring, but inside my study in Buckhead, the air was cool and conditioned. I sat in my leather chair, the same place where I had planned empires and signed contracts that changed the Atlanta skyline. Today, however, the only project that mattered was displayed on the 3 high-definition monitors arranged on my desk. They showed the live feed from Lake Oconee, the image crisp and steady. Beside the keyboard lay the tablet Tyrone had configured, its screen glowing with a single red button labeled Execute. I did not have to wait long. At 2 o'clock exactly, a large yellow rental truck rumbled down the driveway, its suspension groaning under the weight of what looked like a permanent relocation. Keisha followed close behind in her SUV, the vehicle I had bought her for her 25th birthday. They parked haphazardly on the gravel, blocking the garage and the front walkway, asserting their dominance over the space before they even stepped out of their cars. My heart hammered a slow, painful rhythm against my ribs as I watched them emerge. Keisha looked victorious, wearing oversized sunglasses and pointing at the villa like a general surveying conquered territory. Dante hurried to open the passenger door of the truck, helping his parents down. Vernon and Patrice looked exactly as I remembered them from the wedding, worn down by life but carrying an air of unearned superiority that seemed to repel humility. Vernon stretched his back, looking up at the cedar beams of my home with a greedy smile that made my stomach turn. They gathered at the front door, a cluster of invaders preparing to breach the sanctuary Betty and I had built. Then they saw it. The aluminum sign I had screwed into the siding on Thursday caught the afternoon sun. Private property. Smart security active. Enter at your own risk. Vernon squinted at it, his face twisting into a scowl. What is this garbage? His voice came through the audio pickup crystal clear. Keisha waved a dismissive hand. Oh, ignore it. Dad is just trying to scare us off. He thinks he is some kind of tech genius now. It is probably just a bluff. Vernon laughed, a harsh barking sound. A bluff, huh? Well, watch this. He reached up, grabbed the edge of the metal sign, and yanked it violently. The screws shrieked as they were torn from the wood. He threw the sign into the bushes, dusting his hands off on his jeans. There, he announced. Problem solved. Now let us get inside my new house. My jaw tightened. They had just destroyed property and ignored a legal warning. The trap was now fully justified. Dante unlocked the front door with the key Keisha had stolen, and they spilled into the foyer. I switched the camera feed to the interior wide angle. They did not stop to admire the architecture or the light flooding in from the lake. They immediately began criticizing. Patrice wrinkled her nose as she walked into the great room, dropping her heavy purse onto my antique coffee table. It smells old in here, she complained, looking around with disdain. We are going to have to rip out these carpets. They are depressing, and that art on the wall. It has to go. It looks like something from a funeral home. Keisha nodded in agreement, walking to the kitchen and opening my refrigerator. Do not worry, Patrice. We will gut the place. Dad has terrible taste. Once we get settled, we can paint everything white and modernize it, put in some real style. Vernon had already found the liquor cabinet. He held up a bottle of my rare scotch, whistling low. Look at this, Dante. Your father-in-law has the good stuff hidden away. Well, it is ours now. He poured a generous glass without asking, settling into my favorite armchair and putting his dirty boots up on the ottoman. This is the life, he sighed. I could get used to this. We are never leaving this place. They will have to carry us out in boxes. Dante looked nervous, glancing at the ceiling. What about Zay? What if he comes back? Keisha slammed the refrigerator door. He won't, she said, her voice sharp. I told him if he steps foot on the property, I will call the police and say he is harassing us. Besides, I am already looking into power of attorney. If he keeps acting unstable, we can put him in one of those assisted living condos in Buckhead. He will be safer there anyway, and we won't have to deal with him. The words hung in the air, captured by the hidden microphones and recorded to the hard drive in my study. Assisted living. Unstable. They were not just stealing my house. They were planning to erase me, to lock me away so they could consume everything I had earned. The last shred of guilt I felt about what I was about to do evaporated instantly. I watched them for another hour. They unpacked boxes, claiming the bedrooms. Vernon smoked a cigarette inside the house, dropping ash on the hardwood floor. Patrice started rearranging Betty's collection of porcelain figurines, handling them with careless, rough hands. They were comfortable. They felt safe. They believed they had won. Outside, the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the villa in twilight. It was time. I looked at the tablet on my desk. The status bar read, "Systems ready. Purge mode standby." I reached out, my hand steady, and pressed the red button. On the screen, the status changed to active. The lesson had begun. The reaction on the monitors was instantaneous. The warm yellow light of the table lamps vanished, plunging the villa into absolute darkness. I watched the infrared cameras switch on, turning the scene into a ghostly black and white negative. Vernon froze mid-sentence, his glass of scotch hovering near his mouth. Patrice let out a small, confused yelp. For 10 seconds, silence hung heavy in the room, broken only by the sound of confused breathing. Then the house woke up. A low hum began to vibrate through the floorboards, The subwoofers Tyrone had hidden in the crawl space, generating a frequency just on the edge of human hearing. On screen, I saw Dante rub his chest, grimacing as if he had sudden heartburn. The anxiety frequency was working. Then the emergency lighting kicked in. But Tyrone had not installed standard safety lights. Harsh red strobe lights erupted from the ceiling fixtures, pulsing at a disorienting speed that made movement look jerky and unnatural. The villa transformed from a cozy retreat into a nightmarish disco in a heartbeat. Vernon stood up, knocking his chair over. "What the hell is going on?" he bellowed, shielding his eyes from the aggressive flashing. Simultaneously, the HVAC system roared to life. We had bypassed the safety regulators, sending the fans into overdrive. I could see the curtains whipping around as blasts of freezing air pummeled the living room. The temperature would drop 20 degrees in 10 minutes. Keisha screamed over the noise of the rushing air. "Dante, fix the lights. Find the breaker box." Dante stumbled toward the hallway, his arms outstretched like a zombie, trying to navigate the strobe-lit chaos. He slammed his shoulder into the doorframe, disoriented by the flashing red pulse. I leaned closer to the monitor, my coffee forgotten. The lesson was escalating. Suddenly, the audio system cut through the noise of the fans. A synthesized voice, deep and devoid of humanity, echoed from every corner of the house. "Intruder alert. Unauthorized biological signatures detected. You have 10 seconds to vacate the premises. Security protocols active." Patrice clutched her husband's arm, her eyes wide with terror. Vernon pushed her off, his arrogance fighting through the confusion. "It is just a glitch," he shouted, though his voice wavered. "That old fool Zay probably has some cheap wiring in this place. It is just a short circuit." "A glitch does not talk, Vernon," Dante yelled from the hallway, his voice high and panic-stricken. "I cannot find the panel. It is too dark." The voice spoke again, louder this time. 10 seconds expired. "Initiating defensive measures. Leave now." Then the projectors activated. This was the part Tyrone was most proud of. On the monitors, I saw them appear on the living room walls. Shadowy figures. They were not distinct ghosts, which would have looked like a cheap movie. They were just suggestions of movement, dark shapes that seemed to pull themselves out of the corners and stretch across the ceiling. Patrice screamed, a high piercing sound that the microphones picked up clearly. "Look at the walls. There is someone in here with us." She pointed a trembling finger at a shadow that seemed to be reaching for her. Vernon grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the mantelpiece, swinging it wildly at the empty air. "Show yourself," he roared at the projection. "I will break your neck." The shadow merely danced away, flickering across the ceiling to reappear behind the sofa. The psychological effect was devastating. Because the threats were vague, their minds were filling in the blanks with their deepest fears. Keisha was backing away toward the kitchen, her earlier confidence completely shattered. "This is not a malfunction," she whimpered. "Houses do not do this." The strobe lights increased their tempo, flashing so fast it was almost impossible to look at the screen without feeling dizzy. Inside the house it must have been nauseating. The freezing wind howled through the vents, carrying with it the low-frequency hum that rattled their teeth. They were under assault by the environment itself. I watched Dante stumble back into the living room, defeated. "The breaker panel is locked," he shouted. "I cannot get it open. And I hear things in the walls, like whispering." Whispering, Vernon spat, though he was now backing up toward the center of the room with the others. "Do not be an idiot, boy. It is the wind." But even as he said it, the directional speakers Tyrone had hidden in the vents began their work. Soft, sibilant whispers seemed to drift right next to their ears. "Get out." The words were faint, barely there, mixed with the sound of the wind. "Leave us." Patrice covered her ears, sinking to her knees on my Persian rug. "Make it stop, Vernon. Please make it stop." I sat in my quiet study in Atlanta, watching the chaos unfold 2 hours away. I felt a strange detachment, like a judge watching a sentence being carried out. They had come to steal a home. Now they were finding out that the home had teeth, and the water had not even started yet. Just when they thought the assault had reached its peak, the plumbing joined the chorus. It started with a low groan deep inside the walls, a shudder that vibrated through the floorboards beneath Patrice's knees. Then, with a sound like a gunshot, the kitchen faucet exploded to life. A jet of freezing water blasted into the stainless steel sink with such force it sprayed halfway across the room, hitting Vernon square in the chest. He roared in shock, slipping on the wet hardwood as he scrambled away from the island. Before they could process this new threat, the sound of rushing water erupted from every corner of the villa. Upstairs, the master bathroom shower turned on full blast. The guest bathroom toilet began flushing repeatedly, a mechanical rhythm that sounded like a drowning machine. The powder room sink overflowed, sending a cascade of water spilling into the hallway. The noise was deafening, a mixture of roaring wind from the vents, pounding water, and the relentless throbbing of the infrasound speakers. "Make it stop!" Dante Keisha screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. She was huddled near the fireplace, her expensive silk scarf ruined by the spray. "Do something, you useless idiot." Dante looked wild, his eyes darting around the strobe-lit room like a trapped animal. "I told you I cannot find the shutoff," he yelled, back wiping water from his face. "The valves are electronic. They are not responding to the manual override." Vernon struggled to his feet, his shirt clinging to his potbelly. "This is not a glitch," he spat, water dripping from his chin. "Someone is doing this. That bastard Zay. He is watching us." He grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the side table and hurled it at the nearest security camera. The glass shattered against the wall, missing the lens by a foot. But the violence of the act only seemed to agitate the house further. As if in retaliation, the audio profile shifted again. The whispers ceased, replaced by the heavy, deliberate sound of footsteps directly above their heads. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like a giant wearing heavy boots was pacing the length of the master bedroom right above the living room. Dust motes danced in the strobe lights, shaken loose from the ceiling by the sheer volume of the bass. "They are coming down," Patrice wailed, curling into a fetal ball on the wet rug. "They are coming for us." Vernon kicked at the air, fighting invisible enemies. "Shut up, woman," he barked, though his own hands were shaking. "There is nobody up there. It is just a recording." But when the footsteps stopped directly at the top of the stairs and the sound of a door handle rattling echoed through the high ceilings, even Vernon took a step back. The psychological pressure was doing exactly what I had hoped. It was stripping away the veneer of civility, revealing the rot underneath. The united front of the invading army crumbled into panic and recrimination. Keisha turned on her husband, grabbing him by the lapels of his soaking jacket. "You said this would be easy," she shrieked, shaking him. "You said he was just a senile old man who would roll over. Look at us, Dante. We are trapped in a nightmare." Dante shoved her away, his face twisted with fear and resentment. "Do not blame me. This was your idea, Keisha. You are the one who said he was weak. You are the one who stole the key. I just wanted a place to sleep." The strobe lights flashed faster, a dizzying red pulse that made their argument look like a scene from a horror movie. Suddenly, the projector in the hallway flared to life, casting a massive, elongated shadow against the far wall. It looked like a figure standing at the top of the stairs looking down at them. It was just a clever trick of light and geometry Tyrone had programmed. But to four terrified people exhausted by sensory overload, it was the final straw. Patrice scrambled backward on her hands and knees, slipping in the pooling water. "It is him!" she screamed, pointing at the shadow. "It is the devil! We have to get out!" Vernon tried to grab her arm, but she kicked him away, scrambling toward the kitchen door. "I am not staying here to die," she sobbed. The water pressure intensified, the pipes hammering inside the walls with a violence that sounded like the house was tearing itself apart. The temperature had dropped to 60 degrees, the freezing air biting into their wet clothes. They were shivering, soaking wet, blinded by lights and deafened by noise. The arrogance that had carried them through the front door just 2 hours ago was gone, washed away by the relentless assault of a home that refused to be stolen. I watched Dante try one last time to regain control. He ran to the basement door, intending to cut the main power line to the entire property. I switched the camera feed to the stairwell, watching him descend into the darkness. He reached the breaker panel. Tyrone had installed a dummy box with a heavy padlock. Dante smashed the lock with a hammer he found on a shelf, tearing the door open. Inside there were no switches, no breakers, just a single speaker that activated the moment the door opened. "I am afraid I cannot let you do that, Dante," the synthesized voice boomed in the small space. Dante screamed, dropping the hammer and scrambling back up the stairs on his hands and knees, slipping on the wet steps in his haste to escape the basement. He burst back into the living room, pale as a sheet. "It is alive," he gasped, collapsing against the wall. "The house knows what we are doing. We have to go. We have to leave right now." Keisha looked at her husband, then at her parents cowering on the floor, then at the shadow looming on the wall. The greed in her eyes was finally replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. The standoff lasted until 3 in the morning. Inside the villa, the atmosphere had degraded from a luxury retreat to a war zone of sensory abuse. The strobe lights continued their relentless, dizzying pulse, while the temperature hovered near freezing. Vernon, who had strutted through the front door like a king just hours earlier, was now reduced to a shivering, defeated old man huddled under a soaking wet throw blanket. He looked at his wife, who was rocking back and forth on the ruined Persian rug, mumbling prayers to a god she had not spoken to in years. "Enough," Vernon croaked, his voice raw from shouting at shadows. "I cannot take this anymore. This place is cursed. I do not care if it is free. I do not care if it is a mansion. I want to go back to the apartment. I want to go anywhere but here." Keisha looked up from the floor, mascara running down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines. "But the furniture," she stammered, her teeth chattering violently. "We brought all our things. The truck is full." "Leave it," Vernon roared, struggling to his feet and slipping on the water-slicked floor. "Leave it all. I am not spending another minute in this hell house." He grabbed Patrice by the arm, hauling her up with a desperation that bordered on violence. "Move, woman. We are leaving." They scrambled toward the front door, a chaotic knot of terrified people fleeing an invisible enemy. Dante reached the heavy oak door first, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the handle. He punched the unlock button on the keypad, expecting the sweet release of the humid Georgia night. But Tyrone and I had saved the cruelest trick for last. As Dante reached for the lever, the smart lock mechanism began to cycle rapidly. Click-clack, click-clack, click-clack. It locked and unlocked 5 times a second, a mechanical chattering that sounded like the house was laughing at them. "Open the door," Dante, Keisha screamed, shoving him aside and grabbing the handle herself. But every time she pulled, the deadbolt slammed home. Then as soon as she let go, it retracted again. It was a game of timing, a digital taunt designed to induce pure claustrophobic panic. "Let us out," Patrice wailed, pounding on the solid wood with her fists. "Please just let us out." The voice assistant boomed one final time from the ceiling speakers, its volume cranked to the absolute maximum. "You are not authorized to leave. Security protocols require containment." The scream that tore from Keisha's throat was primal. It was the sound of a spoiled child finally facing a force that could not be manipulated or bullied. She threw her entire body weight against the door, sobbing in frustration. Vernon joined her, slamming his shoulder into the wood. Suddenly the clicking stopped. The deadbolt slid back with a smooth, deliberate slide. Silence hung in the entryway for a heartbeat. Then the door swung open, slowly inviting them to leave. They did not hesitate. They spilled out onto the front porch, tumbling over each other in their haste to escape. The wall of humid, warm air hit them like a physical blow, a shocking contrast to the artificial winter inside. They did not stop to close the door. They did not stop to check the rental truck filled with their possessions. They did not even look back. "Run," Vernon shouted, pulling Patrice down the steps. "Get in the car." They sprinted across the gravel driveway, abandoning the moving truck where it stood. Dante fumbled with his keys, dropping them once in the dirt before scrambling to pick them up. They piled into Keisha's SUV, slamming the doors with the desperate force of bank robbers fleeing a botched heist. I watched on the monitors as the engine roared to life. Dante threw the car into reverse, spraying gravel across the pristine landscaping as he backed out blindly. He shifted into drive and floored it, the tires screeching on the pavement as they sped toward the main road. I waited. My finger hovered over the tablet on my desk. I watched the red taillights weave erratically down the long driveway, disappearing around the curve of the pines. I watched the GPS tracker leave the geofenced perimeter of the property. "Now," I whispered. I tapped the button labeled System Reset. Instantly, the chaos ended. The strobe lights cut out, plunging the villa back into natural darkness. The roaring fans spun down to silence. The rushing water stopped, the valves closing with a soft hiss. The projectors powered down, erasing the shadows from the walls. In the blink of an eye, the house transformed from a screaming monster back into a silent, peaceful luxury home standing stoic among the trees. The front door, which they had left wide open, swayed gently in the night breeze. From the road looking back, it would appear as if nothing had ever happened. No lights, no noise, no ghosts. Just a quiet house by the lake. This final gaslighting was essential. When they told their story, when they tried to explain the nightmare to the police or a lawyer, there would be no evidence. just the ravings of 4 people who had lost their minds in the dark. I sat back in my leather chair in Atlanta, the adrenaline finally beginning to fade, leaving a deep exhaustion in its wake. The monitors showed a silent, empty house. The floor was wet, the rugs were ruined, and the furniture was in disarray, but the invaders were gone. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Tyrone, who had been watching the telemetry from his own house. Target neutralized. House is secure. Do you want me to engage the auto-dry cycle for the HVAC to dry out the floors? I typed back a single word. Yes. I closed the laptop. The war was over. The battle for the villa was won. But as I sat in the quiet of my study, I knew the hardest part was coming tomorrow. Keisha would not vanish. She would come back not with movers but with accusations. She would be embarrassed, traumatized, and looking for someone to blame. And she would find me waiting not as a victim but as the architect of her defeat. Monday morning arrived with a blinding brightness that felt like a spotlight on my victory. I sat in my study watching the steam rise from my coffee cup, feeling the kind of deep satisfaction that usually only comes after finishing a 60-story skyscraper. The monitors on my desk showed a peaceful, empty villa. The floors were likely still damp and the air inside would be humid, but the silence was absolute. At exactly 7:30 the phone rang. Keisha's name flashed on the screen like a warning light. I took a slow, deliberate sip of coffee before answering. "Keisha," I said, keeping my voice level and warm. "Good morning, sweetheart. I was not expecting to hear from you so early." Her response shattered the morning calm like a brick through a window. "What did you do, you sick, twisted old man?" Her voice cracked with hysteria and exhaustion. "Vernon and Patrice are traumatized. They are barely coherent. I have never seen my husband cry, but he has been sobbing for 3 hours." I leaned back in my chair, adjusting my tone to express gentle confusion. "Keisha, what are you talking about? What happened? Do not dare play innocent with me." Each word trembled with rage. The house went completely insane. Lights flashing everywhere like a seizure. Water pouring from every faucet. Voices screaming at us to leave. Shadows moving on the walls. It was a torture chamber. Fascinating. Tyrone's coordination had worked even better than anticipated. "That sounds absolutely terrifying," I replied, allowing genuine concern to creep into my voice. "Did you call someone for help?" "We called the police," Keisha screamed. "They came out at 6 this morning. They searched everything. They found nothing wrong. They said it was probably just some kind of technical malfunction with the alarm system." Perfect. The beauty of smart home technology was its deniability. "Well, that is a relief," I said reasonably. "At least you know there was not any real danger." Real danger. Keisha's scream was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. We did not sleep for 8 hours. Vernon collapsed twice. Patrice won't stop shaking. We nearly froze to death. I made sympathetic clicking sounds. "I am so sorry you had such a frightening experience. These modern electronic systems can be very unpredictable. It worked fine for me last week. Maybe the house just does not know you. Stop mocking us." The desperation in her voice was almost musical. "This was not some random malfunction, and we both know it. You did this. Somehow you controlled it. Keisha, I was here in Atlanta all night. I can barely operate my television remote, you know that. Besides, why were you there in the middle of the night? I thought you said you were just visiting." There was a pause, a heavy silence where she realized she had walked into a trap. "We were moving in," she admitted, her voice dropping to a defiant whisper. "We had a truck. We were moving Vernon and Patrice into the villa because they have nowhere else to go." "So you were moving 4 people into my private residence without my permission?" I asked, my voice hardening. "You were invading my home." "It is family property," she snapped. "Or it was until you turned it into a haunted house. We left everything. The truck is still there. We are never coming back. Never. The villa is yours. We do not want anything to do with that cursed place." "That is probably wise," I agreed mildly. "Sometimes houses develop personalities, especially when they feel their boundaries have been violated. You cannot get away with this. Somehow we will prove it was you. We are going to sue you for maintaining unsafe premises. You knowingly endangered us." "Prove? What exactly?" "That you broke into a house and had a bad night involving what the police determined was a technical malfunction. Good luck with that." "I underestimated you," she hissed. "You underestimated a lot of things, Keisha. This is not over. We are coming to your office tomorrow. If you do not sign over the deed, we are going to file for a competency hearing. We will tell the court you are senile and dangerous. I smiled at the phone. Bring your lawyer, Keisha. I will have mine. I hung up before she could respond. The threat of a competency hearing was serious, but she had just given me the final piece of ammunition I needed. She wasn't just greedy. She was willing to destroy my legal standing as a human being to get what she wanted. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Marcus. Marcus, I said when he answered. Is the paperwork for the foundation ready? It is on my desk, Zay, Marcus replied. Just needs your signature. I will be there in an hour. And Marcus, clear your schedule for tomorrow morning. We are going to have visitors. Tuesday passed with the slow, suffocating tension of a storm gathering on the horizon. I spent the morning at my downtown office signing the final documents Marcus had prepared, but my eyes kept drifting to the tablet on my desk which displayed the live feed from the villa. I knew they would try one last physical assault before resorting to the courts. Desperate people always try to force the lock before they knock on the door. At 11 o'clock, a white panel van pulled into the villa's driveway, parking next to the abandoned rental truck that still sat like a yellow tombstone in the gravel. Dante climbed out of the passenger seat looking haggard. He wore the same clothes from Sunday, his shirt wrinkled and stained with sweat. He was followed by a man in blue coveralls holding a heavy tool bag. A locksmith. I turned up the volume on the audio pickup. They walked to the front door, stepping over the destroyed warning sign Vernon had ripped down. Can you get us in or not? Dante asked, his voice tight with anxiety. We need to get the rest of our stuff, and my wife wants the alarm system disabled completely. The locksmith squinted at the panel next to the door. He pulled out a specialized tablet and connected it to the port on the smart lock. I watched on my screen as Tyrone's defensive code greeted him. The locksmith frowned, tapping his screen repeatedly. This is weird, he muttered. What is weird? Dante demanded, looking over his shoulder as if expecting the shadows to return. The encryption is rolling, the locksmith said, standing up and wiping his forehead. It changes every 3 seconds. I have never seen this on a residential unit. This is military-grade stuff, buddy. I cannot hack this. It would take a supercomputer, and about 100 years. Just drill it out, Dante snapped. Drill the lock. Destroy it. I do not care what it costs. I can drill the cylinder, the locksmith replied, packing his tools. But see that sensor up there? He pointed to the biometric scanner. If I drill this lock without the digital handshake, the system will interpret it as a break-in. It will brick the entire house. Electronic shutters will close over the windows, and the police will be dispatched automatically. Dante kicked the doorframe in frustration. It is already a break-in, he yelled. My in-laws are homeless because of this house. Just do it. Before the locksmith could answer, a sheriff's cruiser rolled silently down the driveway, blue lights flashing without a siren. The silent alarm had triggered the moment the locksmith plugged into the data port. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting casually near their holsters. Step away from the door, the older officer commanded. Dante froze. Officer, this is a misunderstanding, he stammered, raising his hands. My father-in-law owns this place. We are just trying to get inside to retrieve our property. Do you have identification with this address on it? The officer asked, walking up the steps. No, but my wife, Dante started. The officer cut him off. Sir, we have a flagged notice on this property regarding unauthorized access. The owner, Mr. Washington, has been notified of an intrusion attempt. Intrusion? Dante's voice rose to a squeak. I am family. You are trespassing, the officer corrected him calmly. Unless you have a key and the alarm code, you need to leave immediately. If you damage that door, we will arrest you for vandalism, and if you do not vacate the premises in 5 minutes, we will arrest you for trespassing. I watched Dante deflate. The last shred of his bravado evaporated under the cool gaze of the law. He looked at the locksmith who was already walking back to his van, shaking his head. He looked at the house that had terrorized him. Then he looked at the rental truck full of furniture he could not access. Fine, Dante spat. Fine, we are leaving. But tell Mr. Washington he is going to regret this. The officer just pointed to the road. Dante got back into the van with the locksmith leaving the rental truck behind. I watched them drive away, escorted by the cruiser. The physical battle was over. They had tried keys. They had tried movers. They had tried a locksmith. Every door was closed. Every avenue was blocked. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. They just left the villa, I said. The police escorted them off the property. Good, Marcus replied. That police report will be useful evidence if they try to claim residency. Are you ready for tomorrow, Zay? I looked at the stack of signed documents on my desk. The deed transfer was complete. The foundation was active. The villa was gone. I am ready, I said. Let them come. Wednesday morning brought the final confrontation. I sat at the head of the mahogany conference table in Marcus's office, my hands folded on the cool wood. Marcus sat to my right, a silent sentinel in a charcoal suit. At 10 o'clock the door opened and my family filed in. They looked like the survivors of a shipwreck. Keisha's eyes were puffy and red-rimmed. Dante wore a suit that looked 2 sizes too big for his diminished posture. Vernon and Patrice trailed behind them, looking less like arrogant squatters and more like frightened children. They took the seats opposite us, creating a battle line across the table. Keisha did not waste time with pleasantries. She slapped a leather folder onto the table. "We are done playing games, Dad," she announced, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and exhaustion. "This ends today." I looked at her calmly. "I agree, Keisha," I said. "It does end today." She pushed the folder toward me. "These are transfer documents for the Lake Oconee villa. You are going to sign them over to Vernon and Patrice immediately. If you do not, we have a lawyer drafting a petition for emergency conservatorship. We will argue that you are suffering from dementia and paranoia. We will use the incident at the house as proof that you are a danger to yourself and others. We will take control of your assets, your bank accounts, and your life." Dante leaned forward, trying to summon some of his old arrogance. "We will win, Zay. The court will look at an old man torturing his family with strobe lights and lock you away. Just sign the house over, and we will let you live in peace at your condo." Vernon nodded vigorously. "It is the least you can do after what you put us through. My wife is seeing a therapist because of you." I looked at them one by one. The entitlement, the cruelty, the absolute lack of love. They were willing to declare me insane, to brand me incompetent just to steal a house. It was the confirmation I needed that I had made the right choice. "I am afraid that is impossible," I said quietly. "Nothing is impossible," Keisha snapped. "Sign the paper or we destroy you." I turned to Marcus. "Would you please explain the situation to my daughter?" Marcus adjusted his glasses and opened a slim file folder he had kept closed until this moment. He slid a single document across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of Keisha. "Ms. Washington," Marcus began, his voice smooth and professional. "Your threat to seize your father's assets is moot regarding the Lake Oconee property. You cannot seize what he does not own." Keisha looked at the paper. Then she looked at Marcus. "What are you talking about?" "As of yesterday afternoon," Marcus continued, "Mr. Washington transferred the deed of the Lake Oconee villa to the Betty Washington Foundation for At-Risk Youth. It is a charitable donation into an irrevocable trust." The room went silent. The kind of silence that happens after a bomb goes off but before the screaming starts. Keisha picked up the document, her hands shaking so badly the paper rattled. "Charity," she whispered. "You gave it to a charity. The foundation will use the property as a retreat for underprivileged children," I explained. "It is exactly what your mother would have wanted." "You gave away my inheritance," Keisha screamed, throwing the paper back at me. "That was my house. That was my money." "It was never your house," I corrected her. "It was my house. And now it belongs to the children." "But," Dante stammered, his face draining of color. "But what about us? What about my parents?" Marcus leaned forward, delivering the final blow with surgical precision. "The transfer includes a clause known as lifetime usufruct. It means Mr. Washington retains the exclusive right to use and occupy the property for the remainder of his natural life. He can go there whenever he wants. He can sleep there. He can fish there. But he cannot sell it and he cannot bequeath it. When he passes away, the foundation takes full possession." Vernon stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "So we get nothing. After everything, we get nothing." "You get exactly what you earned," I said, meeting his gaze. Keisha looked at me with eyes full of tears, but they were tears of greed, not sorrow. "You hate me," she sobbed. "You must hate me to do this." "I do not hate you, Keisha," I said, feeling a deep sadness wash over me. "I love you enough to stop enabling you. You wanted the house so badly you were willing to destroy me to get it. Now the house is gone. The temptation is removed." "You ruined us," Dante whispered. "We were counting on that equity. We have debts." "Then I suggest you get jobs," I said, standing up. "The bank is closed, Dante. Permanently." Marcus stood with me, gathering the files. "The meeting is adjourned," he said. "I will have security escort you out." I walked to the door, not looking back at the 4 people weeping at the conference table. They were mourning a house. I was mourning a family. But as I walked out into the hallway, I felt lighter than I had in years. The burden was gone, the fortress was secure, and justice had been served. The reality of the situation crashed down on them like a collapsed roof. For years they had lived under the shelter of my hard work, assuming the foundation was made of steel, when in reality it was held up only by my patience. Now that I had removed the pillars of my financial support, the entire structure of their lives was disintegrating before my eyes. Vernon slumped back into his chair, his face losing the flush of anger and turning a sickly shade of gray. He looked at Patrice, who was weeping openly into a tissue, dragging streaks of makeup across her cheeks. "Where are we supposed to go?" Vernon asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We gave up the apartment. We have no lease. We have no deposit money." "That sounds like a problem for capable adults to solve," I replied, gathering my keys from the table. "You had an apartment. You chose to leave it because you thought you could steal a villa. You gambled on my weakness and you lost." Patrice looked up at me with pleading eyes. "Zay, please. We are family. You cannot just leave us on the street." "You are not my family," I said, my voice cold and steady. "You are the people who insulted my wife at our wedding. You are the people who broke into my home. You are the people who tried to have me committed to a mental institution 5 minutes ago. Family does not do that." Dante buried his face in his hands. "We are ruined," he moaned. "The credit cards are maxed out. The truck rental is overdue. We have nothing." Keisha stood up slowly. She looked at the luxury handbag on the table, the designer shoes on her feet, the diamond earrings I had bought her for Christmas. She was looking at artifacts of a life she could no longer sustain. "You really did it," she said softly. "You really chose a charity over your own blood." "I did not choose a charity, Keisha," I corrected her. "You chose this. You chose to treat me like a resource instead of a father. You chose to manipulate and threaten. You forced me to protect myself." "But it is millions of dollars," she whispered, the magnitude of the loss finally hitting her. "It is millions of dollars gone forever." "It is justice," I said. I walked to the door of the conference room. Marcus stood there holding it open, his expression grim but satisfied. I paused at the threshold, looking back at the 4 people who had consumed so much of my energy and love for so long. "You wanted a free ride," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. "I gave you a free lesson instead. True value is earned, not stolen." I stepped out into the hallway and the heavy door clicked shut behind me, sealing them in with their consequences. I walked toward the elevator, feeling the weight of 3 years lifting off my shoulders with every step. I had entered that building a victim. I was leaving it a free man. 2 weeks later, the drive to Lake Oconee felt different. The knot in my shoulders that had become a permanent passenger over the last 3 years was gone, replaced by the simple rhythm of the road and the anticipation of peace. I pulled into the driveway and the villa stood waiting, not as a fortress under siege but as a home returning to its natural state. The silence was no longer heavy with threat. It was light and welcoming, filled only with the sound of wind in the pines and water lapping against the dock. Tyrone was already inside, standing on a ladder in the living room. He was carefully removing the high-definition projector that had cast the shadow figures on the wall. He grinned when he saw me climbing down to shake my hand. "The ghosts are going back in the box, Zay," he said, packing the device into padded foam. "I almost feel bad for taking them down. That was the most effective security system in history." I laughed, a sound that felt rusty but good in my chest. "It served its purpose, Tyrone, but I think I am ready for a house that does not scream at me." We spent the morning dismantling the war machine. The strobe lights came down. The directional speakers were pulled from the vents. The solenoid valves in the basement were reset to standard flow. Piece by piece, we stripped away the technology of conflict, leaving only the wood and stone Betty and I had chosen together. By noon, Tyrone was packing his van, the back filled with the tools of our victory. "You know, Zay," he said, leaning against the door frame, "I can leave the biometric locks on, just in case they try again." I shook my head, looking out at the glittering water. "They won't try again, Tyrone. They know there is nothing here for them to take anymore. The house belongs to the children now. I am just the caretaker." After Tyrone drove away, I made a fresh pot of coffee and walked out onto the back terrace. I sat in my favorite chair, the one Keisha had occupied with such arrogance just 14 days ago. The sun was warm on my face. I looked out at the lake, feeling the vast, quiet space around me. For 3 years I had been terrified of this silence, thinking it meant I was abandoned. I had bought cars and paid debts and swallowed insults just to keep the noise of family around me. But as I sat there watching a hawk circle the thermals over the water, I realized the truth. I was alone, but I was not lonely. There is a profound difference. Loneliness is a void you try to fill with other people. Solitude is a fullness you find within yourself. I raised my coffee cup to the empty seat beside me. "We did it, Betty," I whispered. "The house is safe. The legacy is safe. And I think I am finally safe too." The wind rustled the trees, sounding like a soft exhale of relief. I closed my eyes, breathing in the scent of pine and water. The bank was closed. The fortress was dismantled. But the peace I had found in the wreckage was mine to keep forever. We often mistake limitless giving for love, believing that a good parent shields their children from every consequence. But when we allow our generosity to be treated as an entitlement, we are not raising adults. We are nurturing parasites. Isaiah learned that the most valuable inheritance he could leave was not a house, but a lesson in respect. Protecting your peace is not an act of selfishness, it is an act of survival, because you cannot pour from a cup that has been drained by those who refuse to fill their own. If you found value in this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear another story of justice served, click the video on your screen. Thank you for watching.